Hey, welcome to the Anything Everything podcast. I am Tarek, and with me there's Sami. How's it going, Sami?
All good, all good. Good evening.
Good evening. Yeah, it's gonna be a good day. Well, good night actually. It's pretty late now, 10 p.m.
It's a late night session,
Yeah,
first of its kind for us.
but we're being disciplined because we're doing these podcasts even at late nights. So that ties into the topic of today, which, if you don't mind introducing.
Yeah, it really does. It ties into keeping the habit alive. So our topic is discipline today. We want to cover discipline. We want to define it. We want to see how discipline ties into habits. We want to see how we remain disciplined in different areas, different facets of life. And we want to see, okay, why do people have a problem or trouble staying disciplined? Can discipline be too much? Can someone be overly disciplined? Can someone choke themselves with too much discipline?
Yeah.
And what does that look and bring out? So these are the kind of the topics and themes we want to touch on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We can also probably talk a little bit about what people can do in order to improve their discipline. Yeah. And then maybe think about the pitfalls as well of like what you touched on. Can there be too much discipline? That's an interesting one to explore further. But let's start by defining discipline.
Okay.
How would you define discipline?
So discipline for me is an act that you are regularly doing, and it's net positive, which we kind of covered, is that it's a net positive act that you are regularly doing, consistently doing, that is bringing a desired outcome that you want, and it involves a level of effort that you have to put. So it's a challenging act that you have to fight, in a sense, your tendency to not do it. So it's something really that you want to improve in. It's an act that you're doing to improve something. You're trying to reach a goal, or if you don't have a goal per se, but you're also just trying to improve on something, you're going on this journey. But it's an act that you're regularly doing, that you're consistently doing to improve.
Would you tie discipline with forcing yourself to do something?
Yes, it is in a sense, because and we'll deconstruct this a bit more. Discipline is tied to habit. It's tied to motivation. It's tied to, planning your days ahead. It's tied to doing difficult things as well.
Right.
So yeah, I would. It is tied to that.
Okay. Yeah. So I think I agree with you. The only part that I would maybe push back a little bit on is the fact that you said discipline is an act. I think discipline is less of an act and more of a mental state.
Okay.
The act is the product of being disciplined.
Yes. Okay.
I
see what you mean.
Yeah, so that's the only part that I would touch on. But discipline, I would say, is having the mental capacity to put yourself through something that isn't giving you instant gratification in order for you to end up getting a delayed reward of some sort.
Okay, so it's more of a sort of like you're investing in yourself.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say so. You're investing your mental energy in yourself.
Or physical, mental or physical.
Or physical energy, yeah, in cases where athletes are training. For a greater reward in the future. So you suffer now to gain later. But again, do you have to gain? Does there have to be a gain at the end? I think so. I think with discipline, usually it'll be tied to doing something that's going to end up rewarding you in some way.
Definitely.
Right?
Yeah, it's hard to, again, people talk about this where you want to develop a process. You want to go on a journey of acts that you're doing without a reward, but it's very hard to not have a reward for things. It's the reason why they, with children, there's this Pavlovian view that, perform an act, receive a reward, because you want to you want to instill that act, that effort, that discipline.
Yeah.
And you have to do that, at least at a young age, with a reward. As you grow older and you mature, I think you can sort of slowly start to pull the reward away and not require it. But initially, I think you need the reward. You have to sort of, give yourself like, okay, well done, man, good stuff, keep going. And that's what teams do, right? That's what this whole idea of a team and that bonding and shared recognition is needed to
Yeah.
keep going. So yeah, the reward seems it is necessary, but it can be eliminated later on.
So that is the reward as part of the ongoing act of discipline.
Yes. So
What about the light at the end of the tunnel? Why are you disciplining yourself?
Okay, so again, it depends. Okay, if we're talking about from an individual point of view, because we kind of touched on, teams and, they have one unified goal. From an individual point of view, your discipline is for a certain goal. Now, it can either be for a goal or it can be for you're disciplined and you reward yourself for being disciplined in itself, right?
Give me an example of the latter. Because when you tie it to a goal, I think it's pretty clear that the reward at the end, the light at the end of the tunnel, is that you'll hit your goals, hopefully.
Okay. So let's jump into an area where I think a lot of people, always juggle and maybe mismanage or can't really figure out exercise. And by exercise, I mean any form of, cardiovascular training, gym, weightlifting, walking, running, any form of, athleticism that you're trying to keep up with. Discipline has been like a sought out thing. It's elusive. It's hard to really remain disciplined. And in a sense, you don't have a goal because your goal is about reaffirming, number one, your identity of someone that is active physically, that is being healthy. And your goal it's preventive rather than, something you're gaining because you're preventing bad fitness, preventing health problems.
Right.
So this is where I feel like, again, because it's intangible, because you can see how if you do something and you get a reward, but when something is intangible, I think it's harder to maintain that discipline because you're not really holding something. You're acting in a way to prevent something bad from happening. It's very much like loss aversion.
So here's a question for you. Would it be easier to discipline yourself to exercise if you do set a tangible goal? Like, I want to get a six-pack. I want a six-pack by July.
Okay.
Would it be easier for me to go to the gym every day or like 5 days a week from now till July if I have this tangible goal rather than this kind of like a blue sky goal or almost the what you talked about, preventative, as in I want to go to gym to stay healthy, because that is like there's nothing tangible that you're gonna see at the end of it. Like you said, it's preventative. You're preventing, future issues like cardiovascular issues, high blood pressure. You can negate them with exercise, but that isn't something that you're actually seeing a reward from, like you said. So would it be easier if you actually set tangible goals? Like, I'll give you examples, and I think a lot of athletes and professional bodybuilders do this. My goal is to end up bench pressing 280 pounds. So they work like disciplined. They work towards that point. When they get to 280, they're like, now it's 300. They work towards that point. And setting that really concrete goal, I think just helps them convince themselves to keep being disciplined rather than this fluffy, I want to stay healthy kind of goal. But I'm curious as to whether or not you think it is actually important to do that.
Again, I think it's a case of where that person is in terms of their journey and what they really want. Now, if what you want is just one goal, then I think, yeah, it's easier to set a goal and just work towards achieving that goal. Because I think initially, when and I'm talking a little bit about the habit of disciplining yourself. Once you're still kind of new to this area that you're just building habits, good habits, you need goals. Because I think a goal is something you're you're chasing, you're looking forward to, you're working towards. Once you hit that goal, the problem is that, at least from modern science and like research says, is that usually when you set a goal, after that there's a drop. There's a drop in motivation, there's a drop in discipline. You get to justify slacking because I've hit that goal. But from a long term, horizon point of view, in terms of if your overall goal is being healthy, then you may go like, okay, I'm fine with setting a short term goal, but how do I ensure that I stay in the gym?
Right.
I want to ensure that I want to stay in the gym. So I'm with you. In the short term, I think goals are helpful. And I don't want to rule out just goal setting by itself. And it's not as like binary. Don't set goals versus only set, like build good habits. You need a mix of both. And I think
Okay.
that you're sort of transitioning between a bit of goal setting, a bit of, okay, I've hacked myself that I don't need a goal anymore because I have that discipline. I've built that habit. So it's a bit of both, really.
As you build a habit, do you need less discipline to maintain it than you do to build it?
At what point? When you're building the habit, right? Because there's a time factor to that habit until it becomes sort of part of you, part of your identity. Sometimes early on in a habit, what I found is that you do need a goal. You need a certain goal.
Yes.
You need to
be more disciplined.
be more disciplined. And you
Early
also,
on in a habit, I
early
feel
on.
like you need to be more disciplined.
In a way, but also because I feel like discipline really comes with time. And that's a very vague statement, but I mean, like, if we're planning certain horizons, let's say in 3 months, I want to build the habit that I'm going to the gym. The discipline doesn't really get me across the line as much as my motivation, because my motivation is tied to a goal, and I feel like motivation is tied to goals, but your discipline is tied to your long-term habits. But that's just my own personal theory.
Interesting.
How do you see it? Because motivation is there, right? So we're kind of covering discipline, we're covering habit, and we're covering um, goals, right? Because they're all, sorry, discipline, motivation, and habits. The three of them together, they sort of overlap. They vary depending on the time where you are in your habit building. So it's not so crystal clear. And I think with people, where people sort of fall off the line is you're not seeing that, okay, at every point, what do I require to keep going? There's always this talk of from experts and people across a number of like disciplines, and using disciplines related to discipline, what we're talking about now, is that you change your strategy, or your tactics change depending on where you are in the habit building, where you are in motivation, where you are in your personal life, your health. Seasons play a role, like you're less motivated when there's no sun, right? I think that's a thing now. Like it's very clear that in certain climates you're less likely to be disciplined, just because it's just a lousy day or a cloudy day, right?
Okay.
So it is complicated. I think that's where I think we can agree that it is complicated for a reason. That's why you have all these self-help books, you have all these motivation books,
Yeah.
and going back,
And they're called motivational books, not disciplinary books.
and you know what, I find it to be a misnomer.
I agree. And here's
Okay.
the thing, right? So one thing you mentioned was motivation is more tied to the goal, whereas discipline is tied to the long-term habits. And this is where I disagree.
Okay, nice.
Yeah. The reason that I disagree is because like in my head, motivation is a fleeting feeling, whereas discipline is something that you need to build from within yourself. I could be motivated in January to
Okay.
have a novel written by July. Like I start writing in January.
Okay.
I want to write a novel. I have a cool idea in my head that I want to see on a, paper. So I start writing, and I'm very motivated in the beginning. So it doesn't take anything from me to sit down on my computer and type out 3 or 4 pages.
Okay.
February starts. Let's say in January, no effort. In February, I start feeling like I don't want to do this anymore. I get tired of it. There's no more enjoyment that's coming out of actually sitting down and writing. There is no reward that I'm feeling. There's no dopamine hit. There's nothing. I still have the goal of having a novel done by July, I no longer have the motivation. The motivation drops.
Okay, I agree with that. Yeah.
This is where discipline comes in. There's still a goal. It's not really a long-term habit. I want to finish this novel, but I have to be very disciplined in order to stay writing every day for 2 hours, let's say, from now until July. So that's discipline is also tied to goals. But the thing that I feel like motivation helps with is the reason that you want to set a specific goal. Your motivation to actually, what's your motivation to release the novel, for example? Like, why do you want that novel there? That is kind of your motivation. Your motivation to actually start working on it initially is because it's still very novel. Like, it still gives you that dreamy feeling, dopamine rush kind of thing.
Okay.
But then that goes away. And the motivation that you intrinsically feel goes away. And what's left is either you abandon the project, which a lot of projects get abandoned because of motivation, or you have the discipline to see it through.
Okay. No, I agree with you on that motivation is very much a short-term thing.
Yeah.
But then where I think you're using discipline more as a short to long-term, like a moving, piece or moving pawn.
I think it could be both.
Okay. Yeah, no, yeah. As in, like I was saying, more discipline is more for medium to long term. You're saying no, it exists even in the short term.
100%.
Which is fine. Yeah, no, that's fine. I can see that point.
Yeah. But ultimately, when you're building, like when you lose that motivation and you need to be disciplined in order to continue doing something, I feel like it's hard to kind of say
what's keeping you going. Yeah.
But sometimes the motivation does come back in the middle of the cycle. There are days where you wake up and you're really motivated to write, or you're motivated to go to gym, or you're motivated to do something, whatever habit it is that you're trying to cultivate. Some days you're motivated to do it.
Yeah.
Which means that does that mean, let me phrase this as a question actually.
Okay.
Does that mean if you wake up on a day where you're motivated to do something that's a good habit per se, does that mean it doesn't need discipline for you to actually do it? Or is discipline still there, but it's covered by the motivation or something?
They overlap.
They do.
They definitely overlap, especially when, and again, how you define for yourself that act of discipline.
To me, it has a negative connotation. To me, this, and you might disagree, and I don't really know what the Merriam-Webster or Oxford Dictionary defines it as, but when I say discipline, I really don't feel like doing something, but I'm going to do it anyway because I know that the end result is something that I'm looking forward to. To me, that is discipline.
Okay, so it's more tied to a reward or
yeah, but no, well, not necessarily actually for me.
Okay.
But it's doing something that you do not want to do. Whereas with motivation, doing something you do want to do that ties into an end goal or an end result that you're really looking forward to. So the difference between discipline and motivation to me is very simple. It's motivation, you feel like doing it. Discipline, you don't feel like doing it. Would you agree with that, or?
I think discipline is the one that can be both.
You think so?
Yeah.
Okay.
Rather than, because the motivation, I agree, is more around the thing that you really want to do.
Yeah.
And I'm starting to think, based on what you're saying, is that motivation, whenever it's like up and down.
Yeah.
Which I think they've proven by now that you can't rely on it. You really can't rely on it.
No, you can't. I agree with that,
right?
For sure.
It's tied to these moments, as you said, fleeting moment. And it's when there's something like that you perceive as novel, your motivation spikes.
I would agree.
Right? Okay. But you can't rely on it. Discipline is when you've built a discipline for an act that you are motivated in, but discipline is also around the act that you have no motivation, but you have to do it.
Yes.
So that's
mine is the second one for me.
Okay. Yeah. I'm just saying that it exists in both.
Yeah, so that's where we, I guess, disagree
objective.
on the definition.
Okay, yeah.
And it's fine for that. And you might be right in terms of like linguistically, if I don't know if this is more of a linguistic or a philosophical kind of
It could
thinking.
be. Yeah, maybe more philosophical in the objective sense.
Yeah.
Is that I feel like discipline, when you really want to do something and you've done it for a long time, your motivation is always coming and giving you that extra push. And you're disciplined because you've done it for a long time.
Okay, that's fair. I mean,
I'm just trying to define it in the objective sense. In that,
that's fair. To me, motivation is it's a different push than discipline. It comes from a different part of your brain.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Definitely.
But that's
I
like
can see
we're really picking at tiny. Ultimately, we agree on really what discipline is. It's just the broader, I guess, the broader examples of when it actually comes into play. We might not completely agree on, but that's fine. But you did touch on this a little bit. I think we could talk about how people can become disciplined.
Okay.
How about you give me examples from your life
Okay.
of when you needed to be disciplined and how you actually were able to maintain discipline and follow through with something?
Sure. Yeah. So in the past sort of 2-3 years, I've started to look more closely around fitness. And I've been playing football for a long time, as you know. And I've always sort of conflated football with, healthy athleticism, which I found out was wrong.
What do you mean? Can you expand on that? What do you mean?
So I had this sort of like misunderstanding that if I'm playing football regularly, that is enough to, work out certain muscles and certain, areas.
Okay.
And I realized I was wrong, that there were a lot of areas, a lot of muscle areas, even in, legs and so on, that I wasn't really targeting.
Okay.
So I started to look at gym differently. Started looking at going to the gym differently. I started focusing more around the gym. And what I wanted to do is to build that habit. And this is really building on, for example, Atomic Habits, James Clear's book around this. So I was armed with that sort of new knowledge, and I wanted to test that. So the first thing I did was, because, we talk about New Year's resolutions, and I wanted to avoid that pitfall, that I don't want to start or build a habit or be disciplined in New Year's. I was like, let me start a few months before, November, end of November, early December.
Okay.
For 2 reasons. Number one, I get to go to the gym before others, before the wave of all these new people beginning of the year with their fresh motivation.
Yeah. Before the New Year resolution people come.
Yeah. Before that wave of, new people that I'm going to make something out of myself this year. And not to, call people out, but I think this is very common. I think we can really measure this if we do the statistics on this. And secondly, is just for the psychological kind of like rewiring or framing that, by February, I can say to myself, I've been exercising since last year. Even though last year was just a month and a half ago, I get to have that sort of subconscious messaging that it's been since last year.
Okay.
That since last year, I think slowly built up, that discipline in my mind that I've already been doing this for a while. I'm improving, and I want to keep the chain going. I don't want to break the chain. I just want to, and I didn't have a goal. I'll be honest, I had no goal. I was just like, okay, can I build a process where I'm regularly going to the gym for no goal? I just want to explore different exercises. I want to see.
How did you do that though?
Okay, I got a trainer. So, adding to what I said, so I combined and I stacked habits. This is another term that James Clear talks about, stack habits, so that they kind of, they're a solid, foundation that you can rely on when your motivation is down. So what did I have to rely on? I had the trainer coming over, which was a huge benefit and a luxury.
Definitely a luxury.
Coming to my compound. So I don't want to, look bad and say, oh man, I'm going to cancel today when my motivation is not, at that level.
So you externalized it.
I had to externalize it at the beginning. But I did have some internal motivation. I'll be honest, motivation is there. Armed with motivation, armed with knowledge, armed with a desire for discipline, armed with the gym instructor coming over. When you put those together, I sort of created an environment for that habit to thrive.
Right.
And I didn't want to break it. And then slowly, the real test was when I decided, okay, I'm moving cities, I moved from Abu Dhabi to Dubai, and I didn't have the trainer anymore. So that was the real test, is that can I continue that discipline? I did so far so good. Still going.
How long has it been since
Sin-
your last trainer session?
since training, just 2 days ago.
No, your last trainer with
With
a
the trainer. Over a year now.
Oh, wow,
Oh,
okay.
yeah. No.
And now it's like a proper habit now.
Absolutely. Yeah. I don't know. I think.
So here's a question that's
Shoot.
gonna go back to what we discussed earlier a little bit. Do you feel like it takes less discipline from you to go to gym now than it did in the beginning in Abu Dhabi?
It does.
Yeah.
It does. It does. And there's a number of reasons why. Like I feel like again, I really like this idea that you're moving between stages of discipline, stages of motivation, stages of how you are acting and maintaining that discipline.
Okay.
Because and we talked a little bit about this. Maybe we can expand upon it. You go through like knowledge where you're learning about, okay, what do I want to do, and then you go through action where you're doing it, but then it's about persistence. How can I keep it going? And and how to keep it going, I like this quote that says, learn to rest, not to quit. I keep that in mind, and it really keeps me going, in that I don't go 2 days or 3 days at max without going to the gym. And the other thing that I like from James Clear, again, we're name dropping him, like crazy today. He says, master the art of showing up. And that is your ticket to just every other day. Make sure you don't go 2, 3 days without doing some form of exercise. Look at your calendar, use the Jerry Seinfeld, ticking off dates, and just ensure that the chain is going. You can rest, you get sick, you travel, but don't break the chain.
Okay. So for someone who wants to develop a certain habit or wants to be disciplined in their life for whatever reason, there are a lot of reasons to be disciplined, and we can touch on those later. If I wanted to develop a specific habit, one thing you said is the Jerry Seinfeld calendar. So write things down. Did you used to write down like days you went to gym and kind of tick them off in some way?
I did.
So that is one thing that's also has been studied and I guess proven to help people maintain habits, is to keep some kind of journal.
Yeah.
And almost punish yourself if you don't. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But how much, right? And
yeah, so I think an important part of how to become disciplined is not just to, write things down and prioritize things and show up, but also to know how to forgive yourself when you do slip up. If you don't go to gym for 3 days, let's say, you're saying never go 3 days without going to gym. Let's say something happened or you slipped up somehow and the 3 days passed and you didn't go to the gym. I think it's super important for someone who does that to forgive themselves and not really dwell on the fact that they didn't go to gym, because if they do, I feel like it's much more likely that they'll break the habit, because they'd get into a negative thought loop. I failed. I can't do this. Why even bother? I don't even want to go anymore. Whereas if you put yourself in a mindset where it's okay, it's just a small slip up, I'm going to go today, I'm going to go now and get right back into it. Everyone slips up every once in a while and it's totally fine. Like in the grand scheme of things, it's not going to matter that much. And they take themselves and they go. I think that is, it's really important as well to like forgive yourself. And one thing that you did that was really pretty cool is you hired a personal trainer. Now, I know that people who want to exercise, and discipline goes in a lot of other ways other than exercising. But in the example of exercise, it'll be a personal trainer who's helping you. In other examples, it could be a mentor or a life coach or whoever.
Or a good friend.
Or a good friend.
Yeah.
But you knew kind of your weakness, and a big part of disciplining yourself is really knowing where you're weak in order to really try to find something that could overcome that weakness. And in your case, you felt like you had maybe some sort of thought about why you wouldn't want to go to gym, or convince yourself that you don't need to because you play football. But if you hired that personal trainer, they're going to inconvenience you and put you in a spot where you just can't say no anymore. and you kind of got rid of your weakness where you knew that this is going to be a weakness of mine. I'm going to tackle it as part of my my journey to become disciplined. So I think that it's also really important for people to be aware about where they can slip up and why, and try to avoid that, or try to employ something that would help them overcome that weakness. So yeah, I guess, well, yeah, what were you going to say?
No, I like that, and it's two main points. Just to sort of like recap on what you said. The self-talk is very important. It really is, around when you take breaks, how you recover from those, and how you speak to yourself about continuing. And it's fine to rest. It's fine to take a break. You travel, things happen. You get sick. A family member, a friend flies in from outside. Hey, these things happen. There are things outside of your control.
Yeah.
So 100% take your point on the self-talk. The second aspect of self-talk, what you said, is around you have to be honest with yourself,
Yeah.
where you are in, as you were saying, specifically on gaps. So I knew I was very, very critical of myself. I knew that there are gaps. How do I identify those gaps? Well, my own assessment might not be entirely accurate. I externalized it. I got someone to give me their assessment,
Yeah.
as an expert, as someone who's trained hundreds, of people, to give me that assessment and charter a journey. Charter a journey that is not too challenging that I lose motivation, lose discipline, and not too easy that there's no challenge. So they call it the Goldilocks zone, where it's challenging enough that you want to do it, that you want to put effort, and you can see some results, but not too challenging that you go like, I'm not going to really get this, or I'm never going to achieve that, or something. So there's that middle ground is really, it's a fine line. It's a hard, you need to find that balance, basically, to see, okay, this is the area of my optimal growth. This is where I can move in. And part of it is around novelty, where the trainer every few weeks would change the exercises, alter, tweak these a little bit. Instead of seated row, you do it with weights. Use the rope machine when you can. Do hit training here and there. Randomize these stuff for two reasons: one, psychologically, and two, physically, because your body likes changes. It's good. Is the saying, keep your body guessing. I know it's being thrown around a lot, and I think there is some scientific basis behind it, but that ties into you wanting new things.
Okay.
And being able to go like, okay, I'm not getting too bored. It's not too monotonous and automatic and robotic. So part of that is there.
So for someone who's trying to write a book,
Into a different field, okay, jumping in.
no, it's the same. I want to become disciplined and
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah,
start,
just okay, yeah,
instead
different
of being
domain.
instead of it being exercise, it's writing a book. You said do different exercises to maintain that novelty. If someone is writing a book and they're just sitting on their computer in the same room every day, at the same time, I could see how that could become boring. And I know that some authors actually change the place where they write. So they go to a cafe.
Yes.
They go and they sit outside and they write, or they think and they brainstorm. And they keep things a little bit novel that way in order to, number one, get their creative juices flowing better because of the novelty of the surroundings that they have. But number two, so that they don't get bored of just being in the same spot and doing the same thing every day.
You touched on a good point though, because while we're looking at a discipline in the abstract, once you deep dive into, so when you compare discipline, it has its general principles, but when it comes to like gym versus writing, the context differs, and the themes, number one, environment and location play a big role. So you can exercise anywhere if you really want to, if you're disciplined. Like, you could exercise here, you can do some, like body exercises.
Yeah.
But when it comes to writing, your environment maybe, I'd argue, plays a bigger role, because you really have to really focus to do that act, and the act of writing differs so much from exercising.
Yeah.
So I would argue that you can really rely on your motivation a bit more with exercising, because you can externalize that. If you're no one is going to motivate you to write a book. But if you're in the gym with your friend, you're more likely to work out. You know what I mean? If there's music in the gym, you're more likely to do more. You put more effort. How does that tie into taking that discipline? You know, we're zooming in, going back up and down into writing. Writing is really harder, especially if you're, and just to add to this point, gym doesn't really need a skill because it's a skill that everybody's, you know, there's no art to gym in a way compared to writing. Just compared to writing.
Yeah.
Writing is a very much an art rather than just a
Anyone can do it.
a physical, you know.
And like gym, well, there are people
It's
obviously
motor.
that
It's
aren't.
motor.
Yeah, people that aren't capable, but in
Yeah.
general, most people can
Yeah.
do gym. Writing, I think most people can write, but not most people can write something good.
Yeah.
So I would agree with that.
Because it's more passion driven than, right?
Yeah.
Everybody can learn to deadlift. Not everybody can write an article, or
Yeah.
they can, but it's the amount of effort required differs, you know, significantly, and the time required. Like everybody can write an article, but how you get to it,
I think it's
the journey is different.
a little bit different though for different people.
For sure, I'm just saying that
There
in
are
terms
people
of
who
the
feel
themes,
like would I think there are people who would
Excuse me.
disagree with you and say that writing takes a lot less discipline from them than exercising would.
Oh no, I'm not talking about the discipline of the writing. I'm talking about the what you require to start writing. You know, the how you get yourself to write rather than the act of writing. Because there's the how do I get to it? Like how do I get to the gym? I have to, in a way, writing is easier to get to it, but to continue it and do it well is harder. Gym is harder to get to the gym because you got to put on your clothes, you got to drive to the gym, you have to put a specific time where, like, you know, fits your schedule. So you know what I mean? Like showing up to the gym is harder than showing up to writing, because writing you can write anywhere.
Yeah, but the discipline part of it.
Is that making sense?
The
discipline is the
I
act
get it.
of it.
I get it,
Yeah.
but like, I don't think in terms of from a discipline perspective, writing is necessarily harder or easier. I think it depends on the person.
Yeah, fine. Okay.
So there are people who are naturally writers who really, really enjoy doing it, and they don't or hate exercising. For them, exercising would be much, much harder than writing.
And boring. People
very
find
boring.
exercising very boring.
So
Especially
I think
cardio.
for you, I think it's the way you're describing it is a bit subjective.
Probably. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm an active person.
And you've done
generally.
both. Like you've written and you've exercised, and to you feel like exercising is easier. But keep in mind that you've been an active person pretty much your whole life.
Yeah.
So this is second nature to you. A lot of people haven't and find the act itself of going to gym extremely mentally taxing for them. Like it's very difficult to discipline themselves to go out to gym and exercise, and they don't feel any reward after. Like there's no immediate gratification. Whereas with writing, you can write a paragraph and then read
Yes.
it, and you're like, yes, I came up with something really cool, and that makes you keep doing it.
That's a good point, because it kind of ties into, with the gym, you don't see your results immediately. With writing, you see the output.
Yeah.
You know, so that's the part of the difficulty in maintaining that discipline, is because, oh man, I've done 1,000 sit-ups, but I don't have any abs, for
Yeah.
example.
Yeah.
So especially, I think this is it's a law now that, like, we don't really notice small changes over time.
Yeah.
But after a while, you do notice a gap.
Yeah.
But the small changes, they're
The small
imperceptible.
incremental changes you don't notice when you're exercising.
We don't, and anything in general, like anything when it comes to these small changes, like you don't notice
Like when
how
you're
you age.
even when you're writing a book, when you write a paragraph and then a second paragraph and then a third, you're not really noticing how much of a change you're making. But at the end, you're going to have a book just by writing a single paragraph every time.
Okay, yeah.
And then you can look and say, okay, I had a paragraph and now I have an entire book. It's the same with exercising. It's the same with anything that you're trying to do long term.
That's where you need a discipline, right? That you know that somehow deep down that this tiny act is going to compound.
Yeah.
It's going to accumulate to something.
Yeah, which ties like you have to experience some discomfort in your head, disciplining yourself in order to do something that pertains to a larger effort that you're working towards.
Yeah. What do you think of this quote? Hard choices, easy life. Easy choices, hard life. Does that tie into discipline?
It does, but I don't agree with the quote.
Okay. Okay, let's talk about how does it tie into discipline then.
So hard choices, easy life means like you kind of discipline yourself to do things that you don't necessarily want to do, which ends up putting you in a spot where things are a lot easier for you because you know how to get things done. So you do take like the hard choice road, but ultimately that helps you build habits and gets you to places that ultimately you probably wouldn't have got to if you've done the easy choice. So if I were to guess, an application of that quote would be, if instead of sitting down and watching TV, you sit down and you write some code in order to program a software or an application. Let's expand it over 5 years. Instead of over 5 years, you finish work, you sit down, you watch TV. You finish work, you sit down, you do some programming. After 5 years, you probably have built 4 or 5 or 7 apps if you're sitting down and programming. That 7th app that you built gets famous. It starts bringing you in money. At that point, your life gets easier because you have more money, you have more choices, but also you've built discipline in order to keep working and to keep bringing more income, and the act itself becomes easier for you. If you're sitting down and you're watching TV, in 5 years, you're probably going to be in the same spot, or you're going to have a promotion at work, but net gain is going to be little in terms of your life, and you're going to be complaining about why you don't have money or why you're not able to do anything, and you sit and you watch TV and you complain and you say that your life is hard. So I think that's how the quote's trying to apply. I don't know if that's how you understand it as well.
Yeah, to a certain extent, yeah, I see that you in a sense, short-term pain hopefully leads to long-term gain.
That's where I disagree with the quote. And you said it right there.
Okay.
You said hopefully leads to long-term gain.
Nothing is guaranteed, right?
So when you say, I think it's more of a philosophy than it is a quote.
Practical quote? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a philosophy, like hard choice, easy life, easy choice, hard life. But you can have a very easy life and make very easy choices if you're in the right environment.
Of course, yeah. Okay. So the context...
Context matters.
Will play a big role.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it does tie into discipline. Like this is kind of...
Yeah, I like that. Around discipline.
Where it says that be disciplined. Because and ultimately things get a lot easier for you.
Yeah. Because when you instill the discipline of doing hard things, you can handle more.
Yeah.
You just get to handle more.
Okay, is discipline, can it be translated from one area to another? So
great one. Okay.
So because you said, and I'm trying to, basically the quote, right? Hard choice, easy life. Is it one hard choice or is it multiple hard choices? Does being good at making one hard choice make it easier for you to make the next hard choice? If I'm very disciplined in writing, is going to gym going to be easier for me because I built that discipline in writing?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I'll be honest, because of the environment, right? Because your discipline, I tend to see it as tied to your environment and how your environment is primed for that act that you're trying to do. Now, I think theoretically, if a few years ago, I would say, oh yeah, of course, that it just makes sense that if A, then, I would make that causal connection that you're disciplined. And maybe the pitfall, the cognitive trap is like thinking that you can take the specific and you generalize it and then you can apply it to something else. Now I would say no. I don't think so. I don't think it's easier because I'm leaning towards it being domain dependent. It is dependent on the context, so many factors, the location. And that's what guarantees your discipline, is that you can be disciplined in one area and not disciplined in another.
So making one hard choice doesn't make the second hard choice easier.
Generally, I would say no, but
Yeah.
again, it depends,
It
right?
does depend.
Because
It's more complicated than that on
yeah,
the surface. But ultimately, if you want to break it down to its simplest form, I think that the more correct answer would be no than yes.
yeah,
But ultimately, I think in some areas it is translatable.
yeah, it should be, right?
In
And
some
yeah,
areas,
if it's a it should be once it becomes a bit more conscious, like conscious competence. Once you make it more conscious, perhaps you can go like, okay, what's wrong with you? Yeah, you should be disciplined here more. I've done this, here. You know what I mean? Once you sort of have that kind of self-talk and that reflection, perhaps it becomes easier. But I think just instinctively, it seems like no, because we're lazy.
yeah,
Mentally we're lazy. And it's there's a reason why discipline and motivation, all these things and habits are so sought after, because it's actually hard to stay motivated. It's
it
hard to
is.
do it's hard to do hard things.
Actually, you can't stay motivated. You have to become disciplined.
You have to become disciplined.
And
Motivation is
motivation is just a much cooler word, and
it
it
is.
sells much better.
Yeah.
All these self-help books and stuff, like you mentioned, they're called motivational,
Yeah.
whereas really it's like they're trying to teach you how to discipline yourself. But discipline has such a nasty connotation to it, because it's like, I have to do this thing, I have to drag myself and do it because it's good for me. Whereas with motivation, it's like, I want to do it, I want to get there. It's just much cooler as a concept than discipline.
Yeah.
But discipline is what is important.
100%.
Motivation is like, it's you're like, I don't know how many people can say they're always motivated. Like, I'm always motivated to sit down and write my novel, or I'm always motivated to do this thing that's going to be good for me. No, I make myself go do it because I know what the benefit is later. I discipline myself and I do it anyway. And I think ultimately, you touched on this as well, discipline gets easier. People would need to struggle in the beginning. And I think so there's one thing that I read that's really cool, is that if you have areas in your life that you're disciplined in, it reflects positively on your mental health. Like you're less likely to be anxious, you're less likely to be depressed. And I think it's because discipline involves struggle. And the human beings, I think we evolved a lot of our past, and in our evolution, a lot of our like, we struggled a lot while we were evolving. Like, initially there was always a specific struggle, like whether it's the struggle of survival, or the struggle of earning money, or the struggle of finding a mate, or like we're struggling. And now we're living in a
State of
society
abundance.
that there's a lot, and we touched on this in the last podcast, where there's a lot less struggle. So I think the fact that when you discipline yourself, you're forcing yourself to struggle. You're pushing yourself outside your comfort zone in order to grow as a person and reach a certain goal. And that struggle offsets the part of your brain that would fall into depression or anxiety if you're sitting there doing nothing all the time, or you're not kind of pushing yourself outside your comfort zone. Now, I'm not saying it's a rule. A lot of people are disciplined and depressed at the same time, 100%, or anxious.
Okay.
But I'm just saying that it can help you fall out of that hole when you're disciplined, because you kind of introduce that struggle that I think everyone needs. In order to be a healthy individual mentally, I think you do need to struggle, because otherwise your brain chemistry gets all messed up.
100%. I think it's tied to, I like this concept because it's tied to part of that struggle is also you keeping yourself busy, that you don't have time to really like sit and reflect and go like, am I motivated? Am I not? When you're sort of like, you've planned out your week in terms of writing, exercising, outings, things like that, you don't leave time for your mind to say, you know what, just lazy it out. You know
Yeah.
what, just so you kind of quiet down that part of your mind that is just wants to be lazy and wants to, I don't want to say just procrastinate, because it's more than that.
Yeah.
And some form of procrastination is actually healthy. But when that negative self-talk that, as you're saying, is probably tied to not having discipline,
Yeah.
you get to quiet that down, that you're so busy and in the right things, doing the hard things, that you're spiking yourself with good dopamine. You're giving yourself, as you're saying, you're rewiring your brain chemistry in the right way.
Yeah.
That really leaves you grounded and doesn't leave room for the negativity to come in. It's like raising a shield in a way to
Yeah,
that.
I would say so. It's obviously more complicated than just that, but in the end, if like one of the main benefits I think of becoming disciplined in a certain aspect or area is that it can help you overcome potential mental health problems or current mental health problems if
Yeah.
you're disciplining yourself to do something.
Yeah.
Even though it feels like it's actually a chore or it's actually
Yeah.
something that you don't want to do. And I feel like, and I've struggled with depression before. When you're someone who's depressed or anxious, being disciplined gets a lot harder because you lose the part where the motivation comes in and helps you get that push forward. So it just makes being disciplined all that more important because it puts you in a spot where you have to force yourself to reach a certain goal. And from a personal story is I was like in a place in my mental health that was really, really bad in my mid-20s. And I felt like nothing I did or that nothing I want to do would matter, right?
Okay.
But in my head, I wanted to get out of it. Like I look around me and I'm like, there are a lot of people that I can relate to that feel like me, but I know I can get out of it. I know I can become a better version of myself, someone that I want to be. And I disciplined myself to do things that I knew would get me out of that place. And part of it was exercising at a certain time. Part of it was writing music and forcing myself to sit down and write music and have an output. And ultimately, because I built those habits and
Stayed
I
busy.
disciplined myself in that way and I struggled in that way, I was able to pull myself out of that hole because I reached specific goals that I wanted to reach and I felt fulfilled. And that feeling of fulfillment can offset the negativity that comes with depression and anxiety. And I was able to pull myself out. Obviously, I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist, so I'm not saying that this is going to cure you if you're depressed. But what I'm saying is it helped me, and I would say it cured me. Like I'm in a much better spot mentally now, and I didn't really take any medication. It was purely discipline from my part. So it's a good place to really close things out for this specific episode is that discipline, while it may seem like it's not this very sexy concept or word, I think it's super important for people to really understand how powerful it is to discipline yourself to do something that in the long term will make you reach a certain goal.
Yeah, I caught on something what you said, and I really like this when you said how to be a better version of yourself.
Yeah.
I think that's better than thinking the best version of myself, because that internal self-talk and framing signifies to you that it's a journey, that it's
It's a journey. I'm never
continuous
going to be the
journey.
best version of myself.
Yeah,
There's no such thing.
because that's an outcome or a goal that is you don't know what it is. You haven't quantified it.
Yeah.
And you may never reach it.
Exactly.
And you don't have a plan for that. You don't need to.
Yeah.
When you're thinking it's just a better, it signifies incremental improvements.
Yeah.
That you're in the journey. It's just you're fine with this journey and the process of it. And you stayed busy, you were disciplined, and these acts led to rewiring of brain chemistry and good
100%.
dopamine. Yeah.
And I got help, but not from like a person, from a book that helped me. It was a book that was geared towards helping you build these good habits by being self-disciplined. So I had to write down and journal every day what I would do and stuff, and practice gratitude. It's called The Anxiety Workbook, and it's by Dr. David Burns, a very famous clinical psychologist. But it helped me get out of that mental state by being disciplined. So it just helped me discipline myself. Like you hired a personal trainer, similar, like your own weaknesses. As long as you do something to combat them, you can discipline yourself and get to a spot where you're a better version of yourself, which I think is a fitting end to this episode.
Yeah.
Do you have any closing remarks?
One small sort of like nugget, a bit of a historical
I like
one,
nuggets.
right?
Yeah.
George Carlin, who you know
Amazing.
of, and
Yeah.
a lot of people,
Yeah.
I think our generation would have heard of him.
Yeah.
One of his skits, he speaks about what is it with motivation books. This was in like late 80s, early 90s, I think. And he's like, suddenly people need to be motivated. So it's really, there's a clip, maybe
I
people,
like that.
yeah, people would want to watch it and check it out, because it's very fitting now, and something that he sort of like touched on and realized 30 years ago.
He
or
was
more.
ahead of his time.
He was.
Yeah.
And he's very,
Brilliant
he has
mind.
replay value. A lot of his work has a lot of replay value.
Definitely.
And he goes like, if I'm gonna go to the store to buy a motivation book, then aren't I motivated already? So it's a really
That's
nice,
actually funny.
it's a good point, and
Yeah.
it's a nice one to get out of this. While some of these books, they are helpful and everything like that,
They're made to sell.
they are made to sell. And
Yeah. Ultimately, the person writing it is mainly chasing the bottom line, which is money. I'm not saying this as a rule, but generally self-help books are a trap.
Yeah.
Like really it comes from within. That's where discipline comes from, within.
yeah.
So this was a good episode. Thanks everyone for listening. Sami, thank you for being an awesome person to converse with.
Likewise, thought. Thank you. Yeah.
All right. Have a good night.
Good night. Thank you.